Hello, I'm Nick Argyres. Sorry could not be here with you teaching in Shanghai this week, but I'm pleased to present this research that I carried out with my colleagues Luis Rios and Brian Silverman, and I want to thank the Olin Award team for their bestowing of this award. This research is about how companies can better build on their own innovations before their rivals do. I want to start with an example. This molecule is called boceprevir. It was invented by the pharmaceutical company Merck for its hepatitis C treatment. But Merck did not realize that this molecule could also be useful in COVID treatments, whereas Pfizer did, and Pfizer used it in its Pavlovid drug, which is earning billions of dollars, while Merck stands on the sidelines. So this suggests that building on your innovations before the rivals do can be really important. And we look at one particular factor that might be important in determining a company's ability to build on its own innovations: the internal structure of its inventors. Here's a quotation that I want to read to you. Quite often, an indication may be unsuccessful in one therapeutic domain, but have legs in another. However, with the wrong structure, they may not be able to take advantage of this. So we're going to be interested in, does the structure of a firm's internal inventor network affect the speed at which it builds on its innovations? And by internal inventor network structure, we're talking about patterns of co-authoring patents in a company that's very large. Who patents with whom? How frequently? And are those inventors connected to each other, or are they more dispersed? We find that networks that are more integrated, where there's more connectivity between researchers in terms of their co-patenting activity, they're able to build on their innovations faster than others. And network integration is measured by these patterns of co-authorship, and I'll talk about 3 different measures of integration that we use. And then your ability to build quickly on your innovation is measured by the timeliness of your self-citations to your own patent families. Citations mean referring to your own patents in your future patents. And particularly, we emphasize patent families rather than individual patents, and I'll talk about that later. Our sample consists of over 1,400 large companies between 1986 and 2019. And to emphasize, our research, therefore, covers lots of industries, not just pharmaceuticals, which was the example I gave you, but any industry where there's active patenting in the U.S. Machinery, electronics, computers, food processing even, chemicals, etc. Here are some examples of companies with less and more integrated networks. So on the left, you can see here's a company where you have 4 groups of researchers. Each of the little dots represents a researcher or inventor connected to another by a co-patenting relationship. And you can see that those groups are pretty dispersed, whereas in firm B, you can see some of the groups are connected to each other through a co-patenting relationship. So we'd say firm B has a more integrated network. Why are integrated networks important? Well, we think it's because they facilitate flows of information about what researchers in other parts of the company are doing. And this can be very important for large companies. One set of researchers may have no idea what other sets of researchers are doing, but if they're connected through co-patenting relationships, they may be more aware of what others are doing. And they may be able to transmit knowledge that isn't written down anywhere. It's not well documented. That might include knowledge, for example, about prior failures. So we think that information is going to flow more freely in large firms that have connected networks. And that's going to help them build on their innovations faster. And speed matters, of course, because everything diffuses eventually. Innovations get copied. And so innovating firms really have limited time to build on their own knowledge before rivals start to do so, as we saw in that example with Pfizer and Merck. Here is the first integration measure we use called entropy. Entropy is an inverse measure of concentration. So you see on the left-hand side, you have these dispersed groups, whereas on the right-hand side, some of those groups are connected to each other. So we would call the network on the right-hand side more integrated, and on the far left-hand side, less integrated. And the one in the middle would be average, middle in terms of integration. Another network measure we use is called giant component, that measures the number of groups in the most connected component. On the left-hand side, you can see 3 out of the 8 groups are connected, whereas on the right-hand side, 7 out of the 8 are connected. So we'd say the company on the right has a more integrated network. And our third measure is called small worldliness. Small worldliness measures the extent to which a company has tight clusters of inventors that are linked together through bridges, but not every cluster is necessarily linked to every other. If there's too much of that integration, that's called random or disordered, which would be on the far right-hand side of this graph. A small world is the one in the middle, and a lattice is one where there are lots of clusters, but they're not connected. We look at patent application families and rather than individual patents, because innovations are often protected by many patents. And we want to look at a company's ability to build on its own innovation, not necessarily build on any single patent. For example, Keytruda, which is a cancer treatment, has 129 patents associated with it. Many of them are kind of minor, so building on them is not particularly important. We want to also take into account other impacts on a company's willingness or ability to build on its own innovations. So we take into account a number of characteristics of a patent family that might help determine whether a firm is interested in building on that innovation and able to. We take into account a number of characteristics of a firm that might tell you whether that firm is more or less able or interested in building on its own innovation. So we're doing a regression analysis that includes a lot of these control variables. We also did a check to make sure that companies were really self-citing the patents that are most important and have the most potential to lead to an innovation that's valuable. And so we use these additional measures, I won't go through them, but additional measures of patent value as a check, and they do correlate quite well with a company's rate of self-citation. So here are the results in just 2 graphs. Let me explain those graphs. So the top graph relates to companies that have networks that are not very well integrated. There's a lot of dispersion in their inventor network. The blue line reflects the average citations to the company's patent families by anyone other than the firm itself. And the red line reflects the average citations by the company itself to its own patent families. So as you can see, prior to year 5, there really isn't much difference between the 2 lines. Maybe the blue line exceeds the red line, maybe starting around year 4, but the red line is not much different than the blue line. And there's no significant difference there, suggesting that the company is not citing its patents any faster than others are citing them. Therefore, we would say that the companies with the networks that are not well integrated are not getting any particular advantage, no particular head start in building on their own innovations. Whereas, if you compare that to the graph below, you'll see that all these lines both relate to companies whose internal inventor networks are highly integrated. You can see there's a difference between the red line and the blue line, and in particular, the red line is higher than the blue line, showing that these companies are able to cite their patent families faster to a greater extent than rivals and others. But by the time we get to year 5, the blue line starts to exceed the red line, meaning that others are now citing the company's patent families even more than the company itself. So this suggests that there's a company that's got a temporary advantage, but 5 years is a pretty good advantage to have. If you've and again, you get that advantage by having a more integrated internal inventor network. So how do you get a more integrated network in a large company with hundreds or maybe even thousands of researchers? What we suggest is that managers should use a number of different tools to try to nudge the organization toward a more integrated network. It's not something that can be done overnight, but through hiring and firing and promotion decisions, through decisions about who to assign to what kind of geographic location, maybe through some incentives, the company can sort of nudge the organization toward a more integrated network. In prior research, we showed that when companies centralize their formal R&D structure, the reporting relationships for R&D, then you see the network getting tighter, more integrated, but only after about 5 years. So this is a slow process, but of course that's only one tool. A company can combine these tools to sort of achieve that integration. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.